Our top focus this evening, the United Nations has completed 80 years of existence. It was formed in 1945 after the Second World War, and its core mission was simple: maintain international peace and security. But as the world marks this milestone, a big question looms. Is the UN still capable of solving today's conflicts and challenges? Back in 1945, power and wealth were concentrated in just a handful of countries. The UN Security Council gave permanent seats and veto power to the US, Russia, China, the UK and France because of their key role in establishing the UN. Today, the number of members has grown from 51 to 193, but the structure remains frozen in time. Rising powers like India, Japan and Germany continue to be left out, while many among the permanent five stand accused of undermining peace. Russia has violated Ukraine's sovereignty. China refuses to condemn Moscow for it. The US faces charges of hypocrisy for blatantly supporting Israel and failing to restrain its strikes on Gaza and Qatar. On more than one occasion, it has also vetoed resolutions demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. This has eroded the UN's credibility in its most central role, denying legitimacy to the use of force in international relations. Institutions tied to the UN, like the IMF and World Bank, also remain dominated by the West. The United Nations is also facing new challenges as the climate crisis rages on. Inequalities are growing, artificial intelligence gains prominence, and terrorism and nuclear threats continue to persist. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, whose term ends in 2026, has launched the UN80 initiative, a push to streamline generations and reaffirm relevance for a rapidly changing world. Joining us now to discuss this is Ruchira Kamboj, India's former permanent representative to the United Nations. She was the first woman to hold this post. Kamboj has also served as India's ambassador to Bhutan. We're observing the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, ma'am, but today, is the UN even strong enough to handle the problems we face?
Well, thanks, Parikshit. I think to cut to the chase, council reform is the core political answer. If you're talking about making the UN truly effective, without reforming the Security Council, expanding its membership in both the permanent and the non-permanent categories, and curbing the outreach of the veto, the UN will remain more of a humanitarian and convening body than a decision-making authority. But that said, I will also say that while council reform is essential, it's a prerequisite, it is also the hardest nut to crack, because those who hold the veto will not easily give it up, as we all know. So meanwhile, until that happens, reforms in the General Assembly, digital governance, and financing can strengthen the UN's functional relevance, even as we persevere and wait for the political reform.
Right. Just to take a cue from what the External Affairs Minister said in his speech, he said that be it tariff volatility, heightened technology controls, grip on supply chains, each of these issues makes a compelling case for more international cooperation and not less. How do you think India can resolve these issues with international cooperation? What do you expect the Indian government to do in future?
Well, India's approach must be to act as a bridge builder, as a consensus builder, which it is good at. As you and I both know, multilateral platforms remain imperfect, but they are where global solutions are shaped. For example, let's go back to August 2022, when India was on the Council. The Black Sea Grain Initiative, you would recall that was brokered through the United Nations. And that showed that even adversaries could be brought to cooperate when food security was at stake. So India, taking a cue from this, as you say, can use the G20, the BRICS, and the UN to push for more resilient supply chains in critical minerals, fairer technology norms, and more predictable trade rules. Just as the UN helped deliver the Paris Agreement on climate change, India can channel its convening capacity to shape rules that safeguard both the national interest and the global commons.
When it comes to the issue of terrorism, this is an issue that India has been repeatedly taking up at the United Nations. How do you think India can make a stronger case to make Pakistan more accountable for using terrorism as a tool against India?
Well, by turning it from a bilateral grievance into a global security issue. Now, you would recall that after Pulwama in 2019, India's evidence at the FATF grey-listed Pakistan, limiting loans and tightening terror finance scrutiny. But terror continues. Witness the Pahalgam attack. So India must keep submitting dossiers to the UNSC's 1267 Sanctions Committee, push for veto explanations when listings are blocked, raise the matter in the United Nations General Assembly, use the UNGA as a megaphone to highlight and challenge technical holes or votes that obstruct accountability. And we've done so earlier in the case of both Masood Azhar and also Abdur Rahman Makki, till they were finally listed. We could also use coalitions like the FATF, as I've already mentioned, or the G20 counter-terrorism framework, and expose financial trails linking terror groups. Now, the reality is that, that Pakistan is on the UN Security Council today as an elected member, backed by China. So India must build broader legitimacy to raise the political cost of denial.
You know, ma'am, you're somebody who has been in the room when these negotiations on putting pressure on Pakistan, sanctions against other terror groups, when those meetings have taken place. The question that we'd like to ask you is that what is currently stopping the UN system from putting more pressure on Pakistan?
Well, Parikshit, I don't know what you mean by the UN system. Let's get the facts right. The UN is not secretariat-led. The UN is member state-led. The secretariat cannot punish or take punitive action. Let me give you a tiny example. The Security Council's 1267 committee works by consensus, so a single technical hold can block listings. China has done this repeatedly, so also with the veto. So put simply, I would say the UN Secretariat is not the culprit. The Secretariat cannot act beyond mandates. It implements what states decide. So two levers stop the UN from putting more pressure on Pakistan. One is the veto in the Security Council. I don't think I need to amplify further on that. And two is the hold consensus route in sanctions committees. Terror listings under the 1267 Sanctions Committee require consensus. A single P5 technical hold, again, China has used this, as we all know, is enough to stall designations of Pakistan-based terrorists. So while many states may share concerns, these procedural powers of the P5 blunt the UN's ability to act. And that is why Pakistan escapes stronger UN pressure.
Right. When it comes to the issue of Palestine, do you feel now there is growing unity among UN partners that the Gaza war must end? You've beautifully explained how sometimes the veto powers that P5 hold, that curtails the power of the United Nations Secretariat to sometimes take meaningful action. But having said that, look at what we've seen with regard to the Palestine cause over the last 1 week. Many nations, including France, came out in support of Palestine. Do you think this also puts some sort of moral pressure on Israel and the United States?
Yes, I would say the normative censure is rising. At UNGA-80, as you rightly say, about 10 more states recognized Palestine, taking the total to 157. And as you know, as everyone knows, over 100 diplomats from over 50 countries walked out during PM Netanyahu's speech. That signals a decisive moral majority for Palestine. Israel and the US now face growing diplomatic isolation, not through binding votes, but through legitimacy and reputational cost. So yes, moral censure is rising.
Right. If we speak about the issue of trade volatility, we have also seen US withdrawing from multilateralism. They are becoming more inward-looking. Do you expect the UN to get weaker in the next 3 to 5 years, or it can emerge stronger and still address the problems of our times?
Well, I would say the UN will remain relevant. It will remain relevant, but fragile. It is weak politically because of the veto, yet indispensable as a convening platform, the only platform where all member states convene under one roof, big and small, rich and poor, landlocked and coastal. And during COVID-19, the Ukraine war and Gaza, it was unable to enforce solutions, admittedly, but it still coordinated aid, fed millions, and gave the global South a voice. Whether it emerges weaker or stronger depends on reform. If the Security Council remains frozen, the UN will drift towards irrelevance.
That's an important point.
Absolutely. And I was just completing my point. If the General Assembly is revitalized, digital governance and financing reforms take hold, which is what UN80 is all about, the UN can still matter in the next 3 to 5 years. So put simply, the UN is politically weak because of the veto, but still indispensable. Its future hinges on whether reform keeps pace with crisis.
When it comes to having a permanent seat at the UN Security Council, do you see any path to it? And if that doesn't happen, what should India do next?
Well, I would say that India can run a dual track. The one track would be maximalist. Push for comprehensive reform in the United Nations Security Council, as it has been doing over the past years. And in fact, get together with like-minded coalitions like the L69 and the G4 and push for that comprehensive reform. And in fact, I remember in February 24 last year, the G4 had put a proposal on the table in the intergovernmental negotiations, asking for 6 more permanent seats, 2 for Asia, 2 for Africa, 1 for Latin America, and 1 for Western Europe, plus 4 or 5 non-permanent seats. With veto restraint, that question could be revisited 15 or 10 years down the line once the Council has expanded. And in the interim, alongside the maximalist track, also pursue the pragmatic track. And by that I mean secure more pen holderships in the UN Security Council for the elected members, demand veto explanations in the UN General Assembly, and lead thematic debates, as it did in December 2022, when we held the presidency of the UN Security Council, hold thematic debates on reform multilateralism, maritime security, terrorism, peacekeeping, and so forth. So I would say India should behave as a de facto permanent member until the system catches up. Influence precedes entitlement. So what I'm saying, Parikshit, is that India must act as though it is a permanent member. Lead in agendas, convene coalitions, secure leadership in peacekeeping, climate, and normative institutions. When the geopolitics align and reform windows open, India's legitimacy, India's performance, and diplomatic capital will position it to claim the seat.
Right. United Nations is never without symbolism, and we've seen a lot of that in the last 1 week. Let me begin with one issue that grabbed global headlines, and that was President Trump, Melania Trump, and his aides getting stuck on the escalator. President Trump's teleprompter stopped working when he was reading his speech at the UN General Assembly, and he was quite upset with all those developments. And we saw the White House also issuing statements. Are such faux pas really rare at the United Nations, especially when you have a gathering and VIPs of this stature?
Well, you know, we are all human. So errors can happen, as you know. And UNGA Week has a very special flavor. You know, whether you look to the right of yourself or to the left of yourself, the front of yourself or the back of yourself, there are world leaders all around you. Every year, typically, a UNGA high-level week attracts at least 150 heads of state and government. And every year, the PRs or the ambassadors have to survive that madness. The good news is that we all do. And sure, there are many glitches and faux pas. Some of them don't make it to the media. But talking about UNGA 80, I was wondering, Parikshit, have you heard the speech or the statement from the podium of the president of Finland? I think that is the one that is really making waves when he talks about values that underpin the United Nations, that must underpin the United Nations. And that is what brought the UN together in the first place. When he talks about Security Council reform as a necessity, as a prerequisite, and he talks about expansion in both categories. So I think there are some very memorable moments in every UNGA, some good, some bad, some not so good. That's part of the UNGA madness, as we say. It is a theater. It is a theater of global diplomacy. And I think one has to be there really to really appreciate and understand the nuances and what it means.
Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, thank you so much for joining us to speak about the UNGA week, a very important week in international diplomacy. Let's move on. Time to take stock of all the other stories.